I watched my own father empty a small packet of white powder into my champagne glass right in the middle of my graduation celebration. He believed no one was observing him, yet the reflection in the patio door revealed everything. My attorney had cautioned me that my relatives would resort to any tactic to prevent me from claiming my mother's multi-million-dollar trust the instant I turned 22. But I never expected my own blood to go this far. I did not shout, I did not confront him. Instead, I waited until his back was turned, approached the table, and silently exchanged our glasses. When my father lifted his glass to toast my future, he had no idea he was consuming his own scheme. Stay with my account until the final line, and write the city you are reading from so I can see how widely this story has traveled. My name is Ada Winslow. I am 22 years old, and until the night of my college graduation party I still believed blood was thicker than water. From the outside, our family appeared to possess everything. My father, Richard, was a well-known property developer in our city, recognized for his charming smile, custom-tailored suits, and authoritative manner. Then there was my stepsister, Evelyn, 2 years younger than me, who received royal treatment. Ever since Richard remarried when I was 12, Evelyn received the finest clothes, the newest cars, and unreserved affection. I remained the quiet daughter who stayed in the background, concentrated on my studies, and avoided causing trouble. Yet beneath the polished surface of our large suburban estate a dark current was gathering. The extravagant graduation party my father hosted was not merely to mark my degree, it was staged as a display for high society. More critically, turning 22 meant I had reached the age of majority set out in my late biological mother's will. My mother had died when I was 10, leaving a multi-million-dollar trust. For 12 years, Richard held complete authority as sole trustee. But the following morning at 9 o'clock, I was scheduled to sign the final transfer papers with the family estate lawyer and take full control of my inheritance. I knew Richard despised the idea of surrendering that power, yet I never foresaw how desperate he had become. By 8 o'clock, the party was in full motion. Music carried across the manicured lawn, fairy lights glittered over the pool, and scores of the city's most influential people circulated with crystal glasses in hand. To any observer, Richard looked the perfect proud father. He moved among the guests, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and laughing at remarks. But I had known him long enough to notice the fine fractures in his mask. His jaw stayed tight, his eyes kept flicking anxiously toward the broad patio doors, and his hands shook slightly each time he set his glass down. I stood near the glass doors that led into the main house, holding an empty flute when I saw him act. Believing himself completely unseen, Richard slipped away from a cluster of local investors and walked to the private bar arrangement near the dining room. What he failed to realize was that from my position, the dark-tinted glass of the patio door functioned as a perfect mirror. I stared in pure disbelief as my father glanced left, then right, and drew a small silver foil packet from the inner pocket of his jacket. With practiced speed, he tore it open and poured a fine white powder directly into one of the freshly filled champagne flutes resting on the silver tray. He took a stirrer, mixed thoroughly until the liquid was clear again, and drew a deep, shaky breath. My heart pounded against my ribs like a caged bird. My lawyer had warned that Richard might attempt to postpone the estate transfer, but this was deliberate, calculated sabotage. He was not simply trying to manage my money, he intended to destroy me in front of the trust fund trustees present that night. A cold calm settled over me, instantly replacing the panic. For years I had played the passive, quiet stepdaughter, yet in that single instant something inside me broke. I would not be his victim tonight. I drew a deep breath, straightened my dress, and moved away from the reflection in the patio door. As Richard turned, carrying the silver tray with 2 champagne flutes, he briefly collided with a caterer bearing a tray of appetizers. The distraction lasted only 2 seconds, yet it was all the time I required. I glided to the bar table with practiced ease. With swift, silent precision, I reached out and switched the positions of the 2 glasses on the marble surface, sliding the altered champagne into the place meant for him. "There you are, Ada," Richard said, recovering his composure as he turned back to me with a broad, artificial smile. "I poured us both a glass of the vintage stock. We ought to celebrate your important night properly." "Thank you, Dad," I answered, keeping my voice perfectly steady as I lifted the safe glass I had just moved. "That's very thoughtful of you." He picked up the flute containing his own hidden mixture, completely unaware of what had just occurred. He tapped his glass with a silver spoon and cleared his throat loudly. Conversation across the lawn fell silent, and dozens of pairs of eyes turned toward us. Everyone, if I may have your attention, Richard announced, raising his glass high. To my daughter's future, Richard drained the entire glass in one deep, triumphant swallow, clearly waiting for his plan to take effect. I took a small, polite sip from mine, keeping my gaze fixed on him. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Richard returned to holding court among the high society guests, radiating pride as he spoke of his real estate ventures. Around the 15-minute mark, the change began. A sudden sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He paused mid-sentence, wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. His face flushed a deep, unnatural red, and his eyes began to roll slightly as he gripped the edge of a high-top table to steady himself. Whatever he had placed in that glass was intended to lower inhibitions, impair judgment, and make someone appear completely erratic before an audience. Now it was racing through his own bloodstream. "Dad, are you all right?" Evelyn asked, stepping nearer with a worried frown. Richard pushed her arm away with startling force. "Don't touch me," he slurred loudly, his voice carrying over the quieted crowd. The background music suddenly felt unsettling as scores of guests turned to stare. His speech became wholly unrestrained. "You all believe I'm a good father," he bellowed, eyes wide and unblinking as he pointed a shaking finger at the trust fund trustees standing near the pool. "I built this empire. That money belongs to me, not her. She does not deserve a single cent of her mother's fortune." Evelyn gasped, and guests immediately raised their phones, recording the strange outburst. Panic crossed Richard's face as his mind struggled against his loosening tongue. He stared at me in horror, jaw trembling, and shouted, "No, this is all wrong. You were supposed to drink it." The crowd dissolved into stunned whispers as my father staggered backward, clutching his head in complete confusion. Realizing the spectacle was destroying whatever remained of our family's reputation, our estate attorney, Mr. Vance, stepped forward, seized Richard's arm, and steered him firmly away from the patio into his private study. I followed closely, closing the heavy oak doors to shut out the disorder outside. Inside the quiet room, Richard collapsed into his leather armchair, breathing hard as the lingering effects of his own scheme clouded his thoughts. Sweat soaked his collar and his hands shook uncontrollably. "What did you do to me?" he gasped, glaring at me through bloodshot, frantic eyes. You did something to my drink." "I did nothing to your drink, Dad," I said calmly, stepping up to his desk with complete composure. "You poured that powder into the flute intended for me. I simply happened to watch you through the reflection in the patio door, so I switched our glasses." Mr. Vance's eyes widened in pure disbelief as he looked from me to my father. "Richard, is this true?" Richard tried to speak, tried to invent another lie, but the combination of the truth serum compound and the sheer weight of exposure left him silent. "I have the video from the security cameras overlooking the bar area," I added, holding up my phone. "And after your public confession out there in front of the trust board members, you have proven beyond doubt that you are unfit to continue as my trustee, Mr. Vance cleared his throat, his expression turning stone cold as he faced my father. "Richard, your fiduciary duty is terminated tonight. We will execute Ada's trust release immediately." The next 48 hours moved with swift, unyielding justice. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, I sat in Mr. Vance's corporate office, holding the gold pen my biological mother had given me before she died. With a single signature, the multi-million-dollar estate passed officially into my name. Richard was not present to sign anything. He was occupied with the immediate legal disaster unfolding at his firm. An emergency forensic audit requested by the trust board uncovered the real motive behind his desperation. Over the previous 3 years, Richard had secretly diverted more than $600,000 from my trust fund to prop up his failing real estate projects. He had intended to use the powder, a powerful illegal disinhibitor, to force me into an embarrassing public display at the party. His aim was to file an emergency petition declaring me mentally incompetent, allowing him to keep control of the estate for another 5 years while he concealed his financial tracks. Instead, his own plan became his ruin. With the video footage from the security cameras and his rambling, recorded confession before dozens of high society witnesses, the board moved to report him for corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Evelyn called me repeatedly, pleading that I withdraw the audit report so they would not lose their house, but I blocked her number without hesitation. For 10 years, they had treated me like a silent ghost in my own home, waiting to drain the last remaining piece of my mother's memory. Now, as Richard faced civil lawsuits, frozen bank accounts, and approaching bankruptcy, I left the lawyer's office knowing that my mother's legacy was finally secure in my hands. I packed my belongings, left the suburban mansion behind, and moved to a quiet coastal town where I purchased a home of my own. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely free, living on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than for what they could take from me. My father tried to set a trap to strip away my future, yet he forgot the most important rule. The quietest person in the room is often the one paying the closest attention. Now I am curious about you. If you had been in my place that night, would you have switched the glasses or would you have confronted him on the spot? Write your answer below and let me know. If you enjoyed this account, make certain to leave a like and subscribe for more. Thank you for reading until the end.